Mr. Thompson had always been a patient and understanding man, especially when it came to his neighbor, Vanessa. She was the kind of person who seemed to believe the world revolved around her. To Vanessa, the boundaries between her property and everyone else's were mere suggestions. Over the past few months, Mr. Thompson had tried to be polite, asking her several times to stop trespassing into his backyard and using his pool. Each time, Vanessa would nod, feigning understanding, and assure him it wouldn't happen again. But then, without fail, she would turn around and ignore his requests. The audacity of it all was astounding. Vanessa's repeated invasions of his space began to wear on Mr. Thompson's nerves. He was a man of patience, but he wasn't a pushover. He had asked her kindly to respect his privacy, but it was clear she thought herself above any consequences. With each passing day, Vanessa became bolder, and Mr. Thompson's sense of calm was slowly replaced with frustration. He had had enough. It wasn't that Mr. Thompson didn't value kindness or peace. He did, but there were limits, and Vanessa had crossed them long ago. As he sat in his living room, observing her yet again sneaking into his backyard, he could feel the sense of injustice building inside him. He knew that asking her to leave would do nothing. It was clear she didn't respect his words or his property. His attempts at civility were seen as weaknesses, not requests. Determined to put an end to it once and for all, Mr. Thompson hatched a plan. His solution wasn't something he came to lightly, but it was effective. He would scare her out of her bad habits by planting something so real, so terrifying, that she would never want to come near his pool again. After researching several ways to handle trespassing, Mr. Thompson found his answer: a lifelike, realistic alligator replica. The artificial reptile looked so authentic that anyone who saw it would believe it to be real. Mr. Thompson couldn't help but smile at the thought of Vanessa's shocked reaction when she encountered it. He set to work, making sure that every detail of the alligator looked perfect: its lifelike eyes, its scaly, almost iridescent body, and even the way it floated lazily in the water. He placed it in his pool with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the next time Vanessa trespassed, she'd encounter a nightmare. It wasn't just about sending a message anymore. It was about showing her that Mr. Thompson's property had boundaries, and they were non-negotiable. He would make sure she understood this lesson the hard way. In a world that sometimes feels like it's constantly being pushed and pulled by entitled people, Mr. Thompson was tired of being the nice guy. Sometimes, in order to protect yourself, you had to take bold measures. Vanessa had overplayed her hand, and now it was Mr. Thompson's turn to win. He leaned back in his chair and waited for the inevitable Vanessa's next visit to his pool. As the days passed, Mr. Thompson kept a watchful eye on his backyard from the comfort of his living room. He had prepared everything perfectly, and now it was just a matter of time before Vanessa would make her predictable move. Sure enough, a few days later, as Mr. Thompson was sipping his coffee and looking out the window, he saw her. Vanessa was at it again, climbing over the fence into his backyard with the same casual disregard for his property that she had shown so many times before. This time, however, Mr. Thompson wasn't just watching. He had a front-row seat to a show he had orchestrated. He could barely suppress a smirk as Vanessa sauntered toward the pool, likely thinking nothing out of the ordinary would happen. She had become so accustomed to simply waltzing into his yard that she hardly even looked around to see if anyone was watching. Vanessa dipped her foot into the water, as she always did, enjoying the coolness of the pool. But this time, something was different. She froze for a split second, her eyes narrowing as she caught a glimpse of something unusual floating in the pool. It was near the edge, half submerged in the water, and at first glance, it looked like a dark shape, unmistakably large and unmistakably reptilian. Vanessa squinted, convinced that she must be mistaken. But as she moved closer, the full sight of the creature became clear. She gasped. The alligator's eyes locked on hers, its body still as stone, its lifelike scales shimmering in the sunlight. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat, and she staggered backward, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. Could it be real? Could Mr. Thompson have gone this far? Her instinct screamed at her to get out, but fear had gripped her so tightly she couldn't move. Her body trembled as she tried to back away, but in her panic, she slipped on the slick tiles around the pool. A scream of terror escaped her lips as she scrambled to her feet, trying to escape this seemingly menacing creature. But in her rush, something embarrassing happened. Her bladder gave out, and before she could stop herself, she peed in the pool. The warmth of the liquid spread across her legs as she stood frozen, mortified by what had just happened. In that moment, everything she had come to expect, her sense of entitlement, her belief that the world belonged to her, crumbled. There she was, standing in a pool she thought she owned, humiliated and terrified by an alligator that was nothing more than a plastic decoy. Her hand shook as she struggled to climb out of the pool, but her body wouldn't cooperate. All she could do was cry out for help. Her dignity washed away along with her pride. Mr. Thompson, still watching from his window, felt a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. He had never expected it to go this far, but in that moment, the lesson was clear. Vanessa had learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone's boundaries. As she fumbled to get out of the pool, Mr. Thompson couldn't help but wonder if she would ever try to trespass on his property again. In the moments after her humiliating encounter with the fake alligator, Vanessa's mind spun wildly. She was drenched in embarrassment, unsure of what to do. Her pride shattered by the sight of her own loss of control, she flared up with rage. But more than anything, she felt desperate to salvage her reputation, to turn the situation around, and to make it seem like she was the one in the right all along. In a panicked frenzy, Vanessa fumbled for her phone and quickly dialed 911. Her voice was high-pitched and shaky as she spoke to the dispatcher. "Help! Help!" she cried, trying to control her breathing. "There's an alligator in the pool. He set it up to hurt me. He's trying to kill me." The dispatcher, though polite, sounded skeptical, as if she couldn't fully believe the story. "Ma'am, are you saying someone placed an alligator in your pool? Is it real?" Vanessa, eager to paint the picture of a cruel, intentional act, exaggerated her story. "Yes, it's real. He put it there to scare me. It's not safe. You need to send someone now. He's trying to hurt me." She paused, trying to sound more convincing. "It's dangerous. I need help immediately." The dispatcher sighed, but in light of the bizarre nature of the call, assured Vanessa that officers would be sent out. As she hung up, Vanessa's nerves got the best of her, and she broke into hysterical sobs. She cried loudly, hoping the sound would draw attention from the neighbors. She stood by the pool, pacing back and forth, telling herself that if enough people witnessed her distress, they would see her as the victim in this absurd situation. Vanessa's exaggerated sobs echoed through the neighborhood, and she hoped her performance would garner some sympathy. She wanted someone to believe her, to validate her story, and to restore the image of her that had been crushed by the alligator incident. She desperately glanced at the windows of the nearby houses, praying someone would hear her cries and rush to her aid. But instead, a few neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, their faces betraying their confusion more than any genuine concern. They had seen Vanessa before, and they knew her well enough to understand the kind of person she was, always entitled, always ready to make a scene when things didn't go her way. This wasn't the first time she had stirred up drama in the neighborhood, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Still, her theatrics continued, growing louder as the minutes passed, hoping the authorities would be her saving grace. As Vanessa cried and cowered near the pool, all she could think about was how to turn this situation into something that painted her as the innocent victim. But with every passing second, she was only digging herself deeper into a hole of self-made lies and foolishness. The police were on their way, and she could only hope that she could convince them before her reputation was ruined beyond repair. When the police finally arrived, they were met with a scene far different from the one Vanessa had tried to describe. The officers, trained to assess situations with a calm and objective mindset, took in the sight of the lifelike alligator floating serenely in Mr. Thompson's pool. It appeared almost too perfect, too real, to be anything but a well-crafted fake. One officer leaned closer to inspect the creature, while his partner turned to look at Vanessa, who was still sobbing uncontrollably just steps away from the pool. The officer's initial skepticism was quickly validated as they listened to Vanessa's version of events. She repeated her story with dramatic flair, detailing how Mr. Thompson had purposely placed the alligator in the pool to scare her. She accused him of intentionally setting her up, of making her feel unsafe in her own neighborhood. Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and hysteria, but her words fell flat in the face of the officer's calm and composed demeanor. Mr. Thompson, standing to the side, waited patiently for the officers to hear him out. He had already anticipated this moment, Vanessa's call to 911, and the resulting drama. He had made sure to keep his cool and avoid escalation, knowing that it was crucial to remain composed when dealing with a situation that was so obviously a fabrication. When the officers approached him, Mr. Thompson remained calm and explained the situation in a level-headed manner. "I've asked her several times to stay off my property," Mr. Thompson said, his voice steady. "I've been patient, but she's repeatedly trespassed. I've had enough. This is my property, and I have every right to protect it." The officers exchanged a glance and then turned back to Vanessa, who was still trying to maintain her tearful act. The more they listened to her, the more they realized how inconsistent her story was. There was no evidence to support her claim that Mr. Thompson had tried to harm her. In fact, the only thing that was clear was that Vanessa had been caught trespassing on private property again. The officers continued their investigation, questioning Vanessa about the details of the incident. As they did so, they noticed her frantic gestures, her inability to keep her story straight, and the palpable sense of entitlement that dripped from every word she spoke. It was all too clear. Vanessa had fabricated the entire story to cover up her embarrassment and shift the blame onto Mr. Thompson. With no crime to report and with the facts becoming ever more clear, the officers turned to Vanessa and explained that Mr. Thompson had done nothing wrong. In fact, it was she who had violated his property rights. The officers' words were firm but not unkind. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, "you're the one trespassing here. There's no crime to report. In fact, we've received several complaints about you entering Mr. Thompson's property without permission. You need to leave it alone." Vanessa's face turned crimson with rage and humiliation. Her sobs quieted to sniffles as the officers gently but firmly informed her that she was in the wrong. As the realization set in, she stood frozen, unable to come to terms with the fact that her story had been unraveled. The officers left, their demeanor polite but resolute, and Vanessa was left standing in her own shame, while Mr. Thompson stood victorious, knowing that his actions had been justified. As soon as the police left, the gossip in the neighborhood began to spread like wildfire. Word of Vanessa's embarrassing ordeal, her public meltdown, her calls to 911, and the ludicrous claim about Mr. Thompson trying to harm her with a fake alligator was shared among neighbors. Each person added their own twist to the story. What had once been an isolated incident between Mr. Thompson and his neighbor was now the subject of every conversation, whispered between curtains and over backyard fences. Vanessa had always carried herself with a sense of entitlement, and now that facade had shattered, leaving her exposed in front of everyone. Neighbors who had long tolerated her behavior now saw her for what she truly was, a person who believed the world should bend to her whims, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just her sense of entitlement that made her a subject of ridicule. It was the underlying prejudice and disregard for others that became all too apparent when she sought to claim Mr. Thompson's property as her own, simply because she believed he, a black man, wouldn't stand up to her in the way she expected. As people observed Mr. Thompson's quiet strength and restraint, his handling of the situation with a calm demeanor became even more stark in contrast to Vanessa's frantic, hysterical outbursts. He had not only dealt with the trespassing issue with tact, but he had also managed to expose Vanessa's true nature to everyone around him. Vanessa's attempts to salvage any shred of dignity were futile. Her over-the-top display of victim had only left her looking like a fool, and the longer she tried to defend her actions, the more ridiculous she seemed. The neighbors who had once viewed her as an ordinary neighbor now saw her as someone who had overstepped and made a spectacle of herself, drawing attention to her privilege and the way she tried to manipulate others. In hushed tones, neighbors started to talk more openly about Vanessa's behavior in the past, how she'd always treated Mr. Thompson as if he were beneath her, assuming he would tolerate her intrusions, how she had made disparaging remarks about his property, as if it didn't belong to someone who had worked hard for it. It became clear that her sense of entitlement was not just about the pool, it was about seeing Mr. Thompson as less deserving, less entitled to his own space. One neighbor, Tina, mentioned that she had witnessed Vanessa on multiple occasions blatantly ignoring Mr. Thompson's requests to stay off his property. "I always wondered how he put up with it," Tina said, shaking her head. I can't believe she called the cops for that. What was she thinking? For others, the situation served as a reminder of the deeply rooted prejudices they had seen Vanessa display over the years. Vanessa's actions made them rethink their own interactions with her, and many began to see that it wasn't just about trespassing. It was about a woman who assumed she could take whatever she wanted without consequence, simply because she thought she was above reproach. Her racial bias became glaringly evident, and it made her the target of mockery rather than sympathy. As the day wore on, the neighborhood had effectively turned its back on Vanessa. Her reputation was irreparably damaged, and the support she thought she would garner from her fellow neighbors simply didn't materialize. In fact, the more she attempted to justify her actions, the more her behavior came under scrutiny. It wasn't just about the fake alligator anymore. It was about a woman who had been caught in a web of entitlement, racism, and a complete disregard for the boundaries of others. As Mr. Thompson watched from his porch, he realized that the incident, while ridiculous, had forced the community to see things from a different perspective. Vanessa's attempt to make him the villain had only revealed her own faults, and she would have to live with that humiliation for a long time. Vanessa's pride, crushed by the public fallout, festered into a simmering rage. She couldn't stand the idea of being the laughingstock of the neighborhood. No longer able to tolerate the humiliation, she decided that she would take revenge on Mr. Thompson. Her plan was simple but foolish, to show him that she wasn't someone who could be disrespected and left alone. But what Vanessa didn't realize was that Mr. Thompson was no fool. He had already anticipated this kind of backlash. After all, people like Vanessa didn't just back down after being exposed, they retaliated. So Mr. Thompson had prepared himself for the inevitable. After the police left following the first incident, Mr. Thompson immediately began securing his property in ways Vanessa could never have imagined. He knew she wouldn't give up easily, and it was only a matter of time before she tried to cross the line again. Mr. Thompson installed motion-sensing cameras around his yard, specifically near the areas where Vanessa had previously trespassed. He also set up perimeter alarms and placed additional surveillance equipment around the property, ensuring that if Vanessa made another attempt, he would be alerted immediately. It didn't take long before Vanessa, perhaps thinking Mr. Thompson had let her off easy, plotted her next move. One evening after dark, she once again crept over Mr. Thompson's fence, thinking he would never notice. But she was wrong. The moment her foot touched Mr. Thompson's property, the motion sensors triggered, sending a ping directly to his phone. He checked the notification, saw that it was Vanessa, and without a moment's hesitation, he called the police. By the time officers arrived, Vanessa was once again on Mr. Thompson's property, trying to sneak around in the shadows. The officers, already aware of her previous antics, approached her cautiously. "Vanessa, we've been here before," one of them said, his tone firm but measured. "You're trespassing again. You know the consequences." Vanessa, realizing she was caught, tried to argue, but the officers were unmoved. They knew what had happened, and this time, the evidence was clear. Vanessa was arrested on the spot for criminal trespassing and harassment. Her scheme had completely backfired. As the officers cuffed her and led her away, Mr. Thompson stood on his porch, his expression calm and composed as always. His actions, measured and deliberate, had outsmarted Vanessa at every turn. He had turned her vengeful attempts into her ultimate downfall, ensuring that no one would ever again disregard his boundaries or his patience. Vanessa's final act of retaliation had not only failed, but also sealed her fate. She had gone from the neighborhood's nuisance to a criminal in one fell swoop. The neighborhood would never be the same. Vanessa, once the entitled neighbor, was now a cautionary tale, one of arrogance, entitlement, and an unwillingness to respect the boundaries of others. Mr. Thompson had taught her a lesson she would never forget, that karma had a way of catching up, and that no one, not even the most entitled, was beyond consequence.